The stagecoach rattled to a halt in front of the dusty wooden platform, and Beatrice Taylor pressed her gloved hand against her throat, feeling the familiar tightness that had stolen her words 3 years ago. She stepped down onto the sun-baked earth of Tombstone, Arizona territory. In the scorching August heat of 1881, her carpetbag clutched in trembling fingers. The advertisement had promised a kind man seeking companionship, someone who valued actions over empty conversation, and she prayed he had meant what he wrote. Yates Warren stood beside the hitching post, his weathered cowboy hat casting shadows across a face that bore both strength and surprising gentleness. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 26 to her 23 years, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of Arizona summer sky. When he spotted her clutching the identifying yellow ribbon he had mentioned in his letters, he straightened and walked forward with an easy, confident stride. "Miss Taylor." His voice was deep but soft, not demanding. "I am Yates Warren." Beatrice nodded, her heart hammering. She opened her mouth, willing the words to come, but as always, there was only silence. The accident that had stolen her father and brother had also taken her voice, locking it somewhere deep inside where fear kept it prisoner. The doctors said there was no physical damage, that someday the words might return, but 3 years of silence had taught her not to hope too much. She watched the confusion cross his face, then pulled the folded letter from her reticule. Her hands shook as she handed it to him, the explanation she had written on the train journey, rehearsing this exact moment 1,000 times in her mind. Yates unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning the careful script. She watched his expression shift from confusion to understanding to something that looked remarkably like compassion. When he looked up, there was no pity in his gaze, only acceptance. "Your voice is safe with me," he said quietly, the words landing like a benediction in the dusty street. "However it comes, whenever it comes, if it comes at all. I meant what I wrote in my letters. I am looking for someone who sees the world beyond just words, someone who understands that silence can speak volumes." Tears pricked at Beatrice's eyes. In the months since she had answered his advertisement, through all their exchanged letters, she had tried to convey the truth of her condition without seeming broken or pitiable. His responses had been thoughtful, often mentioning how he valued quiet companionship, how the ranch could be lonely, but that the silence of nature brought him peace. She had hoped he might understand, but she had not dared to believe he would accept her so readily. He offered his arm and she took it, feeling the solid warmth of him through his cotton shirt. "The wagon is just over here. The ranch is about 8 miles outside town. It is not much, but it is home, and I hope it will become yours too." The ride through the Arizona landscape was punctuated by his gentle narration. He did not demand responses or fill every moment with chatter. Instead, he pointed out landmarks, told her about the cattle operation he ran with the help of 2 ranch hands, and shared stories about the town with an easy humor that made her lips curve into genuine smiles. "That is where old Mrs. Henderson lives," he said, pointing to a neat cabin surrounded by a struggling garden. "She makes the best apple pie in 3 counties and will likely come calling within the week to inspect you properly. Do not let her intimidate you. She is all bark and no bite, and she has been nagging me to find a wife for 2 years now." Beatrice pulled out the small notebook and pencil she always carried and wrote quickly. "How long have you lived here?" Yates glanced at the words and smiled. 5 years now. I came from Texas after my parents passed, wanted to start fresh somewhere new. Bought the ranch from a man heading to California to chase gold. He thought he would strike it rich. I heard later he came back broke and returned to farming. I think I got the better deal." She wrote again. Do you regret not trying for gold yourself? Never, he said firmly. I am a rancher, not a prospector. I like working with my hands, seeing something grow and thrive because of my efforts. Gold fever makes men crazy, makes them forget what really matters. I would rather have a small ranch that is truly mine than chase a dream that probably does not exist. His practicality resonated with her. After the accident, she had watched her mother chase the dream of recovering her voice through expensive doctors and questionable remedies, spending money they did not have on promises that never materialized. When her mother died the following winter, worn down by grief and poverty, Beatrice had been left alone with her aunt, a bitter woman who saw her niece's silence as both a burden and a judgment from God. The ranch appeared over a rise, a modest collection of buildings painted white with dark green trim. The main house was small but well-maintained, with a wide porch and rocking chairs that faced west toward the mountains. A barn stood sturdy and proud nearby, and she could see cattle dotting the distant pastures. Everything spoke of care and attention, of a man who took pride in his work. It is not fancy, Yates said, and she heard a hint of nervousness in his voice for the first time. But it is solid and paid for, and there is room to grow. I was thinking, if you wanted, we could add a garden near the house. The soil is better there, and I could run water from the well. Beatrice wrote carefully, It is beautiful, much more than I expected. Well, I am glad you think so. He helped her down from the wagon, his hands gentle but sure at her waist. Let me show you inside, and then I will introduce you to Charlie and Tom. They are the hands I mentioned. Good men, both of them, respectful and hard workers. They have a bunkhouse on the far side of the barn, so you will have privacy. The inside of the house was clean and surprisingly organized for a bachelor's dwelling. The main room served as both kitchen and sitting area, with a stone fireplace and windows that let in generous light. He showed her 2 bedrooms, and she noticed he had made up the larger one with fresh linens and even placed a small vase of wildflowers on the dresser. I thought you might want this one, he said, standing in the doorway rather than entering. It has the better view and more space for your things. I have been using the smaller room, and I am comfortable there. I want you to know that I have no expectations, Beatrice. We can take whatever time you need to become acquainted. The Reverend can marry us legally, for propriety's sake and to make your position here secure, but the rest, we will figure out as we go. She had not expected such consideration. Most men would have demanded their rights as a husband immediately. The relief that flooded through her was so intense she felt her knees weaken. She wrote quickly, You are very kind, more than I deserve. Now, that is not true, he said, his voice firm. From your letters, I know you are educated, thoughtful, and brave enough to travel alone to a place you have never been to meet a man you have never seen. That takes real courage. I am honored that you chose to answer my advertisement. A noise from outside broke the moment, and Yates moved to the window. That will be Charlie and Tom, back from checking the northern fence line. Come, let me introduce you. The 2 ranch hands were younger than she expected, both probably close to her own age. Charlie was tall and lanky with sun-bleached hair, while Tom was shorter and stockier with a friendly, open face. They removed their hats when Yates brought her out to the porch, their eyes curious but not unkind. Charlie, Tom, this is Miss Beatrice Taylor, my intended. Beatrice, these are my right-hand men. They keep this place running when I cannot be everywhere at once. Pleased to meet you, Miss Taylor, Charlie said, and Tom echoed the greeting. Beatrice nodded and smiled, then looked at Yates uncertainly. He understood immediately. Beatrice does not speak, he said simply, with no apology or explanation beyond the fact. She will communicate by writing when needed. I expect you both to treat her with the same respect you would any woman, and if anyone in town or anywhere else gives her trouble about it, you will come find me immediately." "Yes, sir," they said in unison, and Beatrice saw only acceptance in their faces. Her throat tightened with emotion. In her aunt's house, her silence had been treated as a shameful secret, something to be hidden or apologized for. Here, Yates simply stated it as a fact and moved on. After the men returned to their work, Yates helped her carry her few belongings into the house. She had so little, just the one carpet bag and a small trunk that had been shipped ahead. Everything she owned in the world fit in those two containers, a stark reminder of how completely she was starting over. "I need to go into town tomorrow to speak with the Reverend about the wedding," Yates said as she unpacked her simple dresses and few personal items. "Would you like to come, or would you prefer to stay here and settle in? Either is fine. I know today has been overwhelming," she wrote. "I would like to come. I should meet the Reverend before the wedding." "All right then. We will leave after breakfast. It is a nice drive in the morning before the heat gets too bad." He paused at the door. "I will let you rest now. There is water in the pitcher and I will start dinner in about an hour. I hope you like stew because that is about the extent of my cooking skills. I am very much hoping you are better in the kitchen than I am." She smiled and wrote, "I am a good cook. My mother taught me." "Then we will make a good team. I can provide the ingredients and you can make them actually taste like something." His smile was warm and genuine, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Welcome home, Beatrice." After he left, she sat on the edge of the bed and let out a long, shaky breath. The room was simple but comfortable, with whitewashed walls and pine furniture that had been recently polished. Through the window, she could see the land stretching out toward distant mountains, painted in shades of gold and purple by the late afternoon sun. It was so different from the cramped, cold room in her aunt's Boston townhouse, where she had felt like a burden with every breath. Here, in this wild, open place, she felt the first stirring of something she had not experienced in 3 years. Hope. That evening, Yates proved to be honest about his cooking skills. The stew was edible but bland, and she found herself already mentally planning how to improve it. They ate at the small table, and he talked easily about the ranch, the cattle, and his plans for the future. He did not seem uncomfortable with her silence, did not press her to respond to every statement. Instead, he gave her natural openings to write if she wished, but seemed equally content if she simply listened. "I know this is all very sudden," he said as they cleaned up after the meal. She had taken over the washing while he dried, falling into an easy rhythm. "We have only known each other through letters, and now here you are, in a strange place with a man you just met. I want you to know that you are safe here, Beatrice. I would never hurt you or force you into anything you are not ready for. This marriage, if you choose to go through with it, will be whatever we make it together." She set down the plate she was washing and reached for her notebook, which she had learned to keep always within reach. "Why did you really send for a mail-order bride? A man like you could find a wife here." He was quiet for a moment, his hand stilling on the dish towel. "Honest answer. Because the women here, the ones looking for husbands, they want things I cannot give. They want a rich man or a man heading for the city or a man who will sweep them off their feet with pretty words and grand gestures. I am just a rancher who likes the quiet, who prefers actions to speeches. I thought maybe, somewhere far away, there might be someone who wanted the same simple life I do, and then I got your letter. What about my letter made you respond? You were honest," he said simply. "You did not paint yourself as perfect or make promises you might not be able to keep. You told me about your love of reading, your skill with numbers, your fear that you might not be what I wanted. That last part especially struck me. Here I was, worrying I would not be enough, and there you were, worried about the same thing. It made me think we might understand each other." She smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. She wrote, "I was afraid to tell you about my voice. I thought you would withdraw your offer." "I will admit I was surprised when I read your letter on the train," he said. "But then I thought about it, really thought about what it meant. And I realized that you trusted me enough to be vulnerable, to tell me the truth even though it might cost you this opportunity. That kind of honesty and courage is worth more than any amount of idle chatter. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "I have been told I talk too much anyway. Maybe you will balance me out." She laughed, the sound coming out as a soft exhalation, and his smile widened. "Is that a laugh I heard? Good. I was hoping I had not ended up with someone who thought I was completely ridiculous." They finished the dishes in comfortable silence, and then Beatrice excused herself to her room. She was exhausted from the journey and the emotional weight of the day. As she changed into her nightgown and brushed out her long hair, she thought about how different this day had been from her expectations. She had braced herself for disappointment, for a man who would see her silence as a defect to be tolerated. Instead, she had found someone who seemed to see it as simply one part of who she was. She knelt beside the bed and clasped her hands, offering a prayer of gratitude for safe travel and for the unexpected blessing of Yates's kindness. As she climbed under the clean sheets and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the Arizona night, she felt herself relaxing for the first time in years. The next morning, she woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the distant lowing of cattle. Sunlight streamed through the window, bright and unfiltered in a way Boston mornings never were. She dressed quickly in one of her better day dresses and pinned up her hair, studying herself in the small mirror above the dresser. Her face looked the same, pale skin that burned easily in the sun, light brown hair that tended toward unruly curls, and gray eyes that always seemed too serious. But there was something different in her expression, a softness that had not been there before. When she emerged from her room, she found Yates already in the kitchen, attempting to make breakfast. He looked up with a rueful smile. "I am about to burn these eggs. Would you like to take over before I ruin them completely?" She moved to the stove, gently displacing him, and assessed the situation. The eggs were indeed on the verge of burning, and the bacon was uneven. She made quick work of salvaging what she could and starting fresh, finding her way around the kitchen through practiced instinct. Within minutes, she had produced a proper breakfast, and Yates looked at the results with genuine appreciation. "I am going to eat very well now that you are here," he said, taking his seat. "This looks wonderful." They ate together, and then he helped her with the dishes before heading out to hitch up the wagon. Charlie and Tom were already at work, and she could see them in the distance, moving among the cattle. The ranch felt alive with purpose, everyone knowing their role and fulfilling it. The ride into Tombstone was pleasant in the cool morning air. Yates pointed out more landmarks and told her stories about the town, which had grown rapidly with the silver mining boom. "It can be rough sometimes," he said. "There are good people here, but also men looking to make quick money and not particular about how they do it. Stay close in town, and if anyone bothers you, find me or the sheriff." Tombstone itself was a fascinating mix of civilization and frontier chaos. Wooden buildings lined streets that were either dusty or muddy depending on the weather, and the sound of hammering competed with piano music drifting from saloons. Men in suits walked alongside cowboys and miners, and she saw more than a few women in fine dresses that spoke of Eastern fashion. Yates helped her down from the wagon in front of a modest white church. "Reverend Thomas is a good man. He has been after me to settle down for a while now, so he will be pleased to hear I have finally taken his advice." The Reverend proved to be a balding man in his 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. He welcomed Beatrice warmly, and Yates explained her situation with the same straightforward acceptance he had shown from the beginning. "I see," Reverend Thomas said thoughtfully. "Well, Miss Taylor, the vows are spoken aloud, but I believe God hears the intentions of the heart above all else. We can certainly make arrangements that will work for you. Perhaps you could nod to indicate your consent." Relief flooded through her and she nodded eagerly, then pulled out her notebook. "Thank you for understanding. We are all God's children, my dear, and He makes each of us exactly as we are meant to be. Now, when would you two like to have the ceremony?" Yates looked at Beatrice. "Is this Saturday too soon? That gives us 3 days." She thought about it. 3 days to prepare, to be certain this was what she wanted. But she had already traveled across the country to be here, had already committed to this path. And with each passing hour she felt more certain that Yates was exactly the man his letters had suggested. She nodded. "Saturday it is," the Reverend said, making a note in his book. "Morning or afternoon?" "Morning," Yates said, "before it gets too hot. Just a simple ceremony, nothing fancy. Beatrice does not have family here, and my only family is Charlie and Tom at this point." "I will invite Mrs. Henderson," Reverend Thomas said with a smile. "She would never forgive me if she missed this, and she will spread the word to the other respectable ladies in town. You will have your witnesses and then some, I imagine." After leaving the church, Yates took her to the general store. "You will need a few things, I imagine. Let me know what you require and I will settle the account." She selected fabric for a new dress, wanting something prettier than her worn traveling clothes for the wedding. She also picked out supplies she would need for cooking and household management, practical items that would help her build a home. Yates added a few things without asking, including a beautiful hair comb decorated with small blue stones and a thick shawl for cool evenings. "You do not have to," she wrote, but he shook his head. "I want to. You left everything behind to come here. Let me give you a few things to start this new life properly." She met Mrs. Henderson outside the store, exactly as Yates had predicted. The older woman descended on them with barely concealed curiosity, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. "So you are the mysterious bride," she said, hands on her hips. "Yates Warren, you devil, you never said she was such a pretty thing, and so young too. You will have your hands full keeping the other men in line." "Mrs. Henderson," Yates said with long-suffering patience, "this is Miss Beatrice Taylor. Beatrice, this is Mrs. Henderson, the town's unofficial mayor and official source of all information." "Oh, hush, you cheeky boy." But she was smiling. She turned to Beatrice. "Welcome to Tombstone, dear. If you need anything, anything at all, you come see me. Do not let this place intimidate you. It looks rough, but there are good people here under all the dust and noise." Beatrice wrote quickly, "Thank you. That is very kind." Mrs. Henderson read the note and looked at Yates with raised eyebrows. He explained simply, and the older woman's expression softened. "Well now, that is nothing to worry about. My late husband barely spoke a word his entire life, and we had 47 happy years together. It is what is in your heart that matters, not what comes out of your mouth. You take care of this boy, and he will take care of you. He is a good man, even if he is too stubborn for his own good sometimes." The approval in her voice made Beatrice smile. She was beginning to understand that Mrs. Henderson's gruff manner hid a genuinely caring heart. They spent another hour in town, and Yates introduced her to the shopkeepers and several other townspeople. Everyone seemed curious but welcoming, and no one made her feel uncomfortable about her silence. She realized that Yates must have already spoken to some of them, preparing the way so she would not face awkward questions or assumptions. On the ride back to the ranch, she wrote, You told people about me before I arrived. I mentioned I had found someone, yes, he admitted. And I explained that you might not respond to questions in the way they expected. I hope that is all right. I thought it might be easier for you if they already knew. It was very thoughtful, thank you. I just want you to be comfortable here, he said. This is going to be your home, your community. I do not want you to feel like you have to hide or explain yourself constantly. Over the next 3 days, they fell into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Beatrice took over the cooking and household management, finding satisfaction in bringing order and comfort to the space. She cleaned thoroughly, organized the pantry, and began planning a garden. Yates worked the ranch with Charlie and Tom, but he came in for meals and spent the evenings with her on the porch, talking about his day while she listened and occasionally wrote responses. She learned more about him with each passing hour. He had grown up on a ranch in Texas, the only son of parents who had loved each other deeply and taught him to value integrity and hard work. Their deaths in a fever outbreak had left him unmoored, and he had come to Arizona territory seeking a fresh start. He had built his ranch from almost nothing, slowly acquiring cattle and land, focused on steady growth rather than quick profits. I want to build something lasting, he told her one evening as they watched the sun set over the mountains. Something I can be proud of and maybe pass on to children someday. Not a big empire, just a good, honest operation that provides a decent living. She wrote, "That is a worthy goal. Do you want children?" "I do," he said quietly. "I always imagined having a family, kids running around causing happy chaos. But I want that with the right person, someone who would be a true partner. What about you?" "I want children too. I used to worry that my silence would make me a bad mother, but I have read about deaf parents who raise happy children. Love matters more than words. You will be a wonderful mother," he said with such certainty that she felt tears prick her eyes. "You are patient and kind and braver than you give yourself credit for. Any child would be lucky to have you." The night before the wedding, Mrs. Henderson arrived with several other women from town, carrying pies and casseroles and a beautiful bouquet of flowers. "We thought we would give you a proper welcome," she announced, bustling into the house like she owned it. "And make sure you have something special for the wedding breakfast tomorrow." The women, all wives of ranchers and shopkeepers, gathered around the table and peppered Beatrice with friendly questions. They were curious but not intrusive, and they seemed genuinely happy for her. One of them, a young woman named Sarah who could not have been much older than Beatrice, took her hand. "I came here as a mail-order bride 3 years ago," she confided. "I was terrified, but it turned out to be the best decision I ever made. My husband is wonderful, and I love this wild, beautiful place. I hope you will be just as happy." Beatrice squeezed her hand gratefully, feeling the warmth of female friendship for the first time since her mother's death. These women were offering more than just food and flowers. They were offering acceptance and community, a place to belong. After they left, Yates found her on the porch looking out at the darkening sky. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" he asked softly. She nodded, then wrote, "But also excited. Is that strange?" "Not at all. I feel the same way. This is a big step, binding our lives together, but I am glad it is you, Beatrice. I feel like I have known you longer than a few days." "I feel the same way. Your letters showed me who you really are, and meeting you has only confirmed what I hoped." "Then we are both fortunate," he said. "Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow we start our life together properly." The wedding morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect Arizona day that seemed designed for important occasions. Beatrice dressed in the new gown she had made from the fabric Yates bought her, a soft blue that matched her eyes. She arranged her hair with the comb he had given her, and looked at herself in the mirror, hardly recognizing the nervous but hopeful woman looking back. The church was small but full when they arrived. In addition to Charlie, Tom, Mrs. Henderson, and the women who had visited, several other townspeople had come, curious to witness the wedding. Yates stood at the front in his best clothes, his hair neatly combed and his eyes fixed on her as she walked down the short aisle on Charlie's offered arm. Reverend Thomas conducted a simple but moving ceremony. When it came time for the vows, he spoke them aloud, asking Yates first. Yates's voice was clear and steady as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her, his eyes never leaving hers. Then the Reverend turned to her. "Beatrice Taylor, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do you part?" She nodded, putting every ounce of conviction she possessed into that single gesture. Yates smiled, and she saw moisture in his eyes. "Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona and Almighty God, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Yates, you may kiss your bride." He stepped forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But she did not want to pull away. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted the promise of the life they would build together. His lips met hers gently, a soft press that held more sweetness than passion, a beginning rather than a culmination. The small gathering erupted in applause, and Mrs. Henderson dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "About time someone made an honest man out of you, Yates Warren," she called out, making everyone laugh. The wedding breakfast was held at the ranch, with tables set up outside under the shade of the cottonwood tree. The food was plentiful, the conversation lively, and Beatrice found herself relaxing into the joy of the day. These people, who had been strangers just days ago, were now celebrating with them, welcoming her into their community without reservation. Sarah sat beside her, chattering happily about ranch life and offering advice. "The key to dealing with cattle is to be more stubborn than they are," she said with a laugh. "And the key to dealing with cowboys is pretty much the same. Do not let them intimidate you. They are all big softies under the bluster." As the afternoon wore on and the guests began to depart, Beatrice felt a flutter of nervousness. She was married now, truly and legally bound to Yates. The night ahead held uncertainties she had tried not to think about too much. Yates seemed to sense her anxiety. After the last guest had left and they were alone cleaning up the remnants of the celebration, he spoke quietly. "Beatrice, I meant what I said before. We take this at whatever pace you need. Being married does not change that. Your comfort and happiness are what matter to me." She took his hand, squeezing it gently, then wrote with her free hand, "I trust you. I want to be a real wife to you." "There is no rush," he said, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing her knuckles. "We have all the time in the world." But that night, when he kissed her again in the privacy of their home, there was more heat in it, a promise of passion restrained by consideration. She responded, tentative but willing, and when he pulled back, breathing hard, his eyes were dark with wanting. "You are making this very difficult," he said with a shaky laugh. "Being a gentleman, I mean." She smiled and wrote, "Maybe I do not want you to be such a gentleman right now." His breath caught. "Beatrice, are you sure?" She nodded, her heart racing but her resolve firm. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted to truly begin their marriage without shadows or uncertainty. She took his hand and led him to the bedroom they would now share, the larger one he had given her when she first arrived. What passed between them that night was tender and awkward and sweet, exactly what a wedding night should be. He was gentle and patient, guiding her through new experiences with care and consideration. When she tensed, he slowed. When she relaxed, he continued. And when it was over, he held her close, stroking her hair and murmuring soft words of affection. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. She nodded against his chest, feeling cherished in a way she never had before. She had given herself to him, and he had treated the gift with reverence. She wrote on the small notepad she kept by the bed, "More than all right, happy." "Good," he whispered, kissing the top of her head. "That is all I want, your happiness." The days that followed established them as true partners. Beatrice managed the household with efficiency and care, cooking meals that made Yates close his eyes in appreciation, tending the garden that was already beginning to take shape, and keeping the house comfortable and welcoming. Yates worked the ranch with dedication, but he always made time for her, never treating her like a servant or an afterthought. They developed their own language beyond words. A touch on the arm could convey concern or affection. A smile could communicate joy or amusement. She learned to read his moods in the set of his shoulders, or the way he removed his hat. He learned to interpret her expressions and gestures with increasing accuracy. But there were also the written conversations, the notes she left for him to find throughout the day. Sometimes they were practical reminders or questions about supplies. Other times they were simply thoughts she wanted to share, observations about the beauty of the landscape or gratitude for some kindness he had shown. He wrote back, leaving his own notes for her. She found one tucked into her sewing basket. "Your biscuits are the best thing I have ever tasted, except possibly your kisses." The words made her blush and laugh at the same time. 6 weeks into their marriage, Yates came home one afternoon looking troubled. Beatrice immediately sensed something was wrong and wrote, "What happened?" "There is talk in town about rustlers working the area," he said, scrubbing a hand over his face. "Several ranchers have lost cattle, including old man Peterson. He lost nearly 30 head last week. Sheriff says they are likely holing up somewhere in the hills and hitting ranches at night." Her heart clenched with worry. "Are we in danger?" "I do not think they will try anything here as long as Charlie, Tom, and I are vigilant, but I want you to be careful, Beatrice. Do not go far from the house when we are out working, and if you see anything suspicious, anything at all, ring the bell by the porch. We will hear it and come running." She nodded, fear prickling at the back of her neck. The accident that had taken her father and brother had been a random act of violence, a stagecoach robbery gone wrong. The thought of such danger coming to this place, to this new life she was building, terrified her. Yates pulled her into his arms. "I will keep you safe. I promise you that. Nothing is going to happen to you or this ranch." For 2 weeks, nothing did happen. Life continued normally, though Yates and the hands took turns keeping watch at night. Beatrice kept to the house and immediate yard, never venturing out to her beloved garden without making sure someone was nearby. Then, on a moonless night in late October, she woke to the sound of gunshots. Yates was already out of bed, pulling on his pants and reaching for the rifle he kept by the door. "Stay inside," he ordered, his voice hard with command. "Lock the door behind me and do not open it unless you hear my voice." She clutched his arm, terror making her mute even beyond her usual silence. He kissed her quickly, fiercely. "I will come back to you, I swear it." Then he was gone, running toward the sound of more gunshots and the panicked lowing of cattle. She locked the door with shaking hands and moved to the window, pressing her face against the glass and trying to see through the darkness. Shapes moved in the night, too indistinct to identify. She heard shouting, more gunfire, and the thunder of hooves. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to run after Yates, to make sure he was safe, but she knew she would only be a liability in a fight. Time stretched endlessly. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the sounds began to fade. She heard familiar voices calling out, checking on each other. Then footsteps on the porch and Yates's voice. "Beatrice, it is me. Open up." She fumbled with the lock and threw open the door. He was dirty and breathing hard with a cut on his cheek, but he was alive and whole. She threw herself into his arms and he held her tight. "It is over," he said into her hair. "They ran off when we started shooting back. Got away with maybe 10 head before we drove them off. Could have been much worse." Charlie and Tom appeared behind him, both looking similarly disheveled but unharmed. "We will take first watch," Charlie said. "You take care of your wife. She looks about ready to faint." Indeed, Beatrice's legs felt like water. Yates guided her back inside and sat her down, fetching water and checking her over as though she had been the one in danger. "I am all right," he kept saying. "You are all right. Everything is all right." But it was not quite all right, she realized. The violence had shattered the peaceful bubble they had been living in, reminding her that danger was always lurking at the edges of this wild territory. She had felt safe here, safer than she had in years, and now that safety felt fragile. Over the next few days, the ranchers banded together, forming patrols and sharing information. The rustlers had apparently moved on, likely realizing the area was too hot for them now. But the incident left its mark, making everyone more cautious and alert. Beatrice found herself jumping at sudden sounds and checking the windows constantly when Yates was out working. He noticed, of course, and tried to reassure her, but the fear had taken root. One evening, about a week after the rustling incident, he found her sitting on the porch at sunset, staring out at the darkening landscape with haunted eyes. He sat beside her and took her hand. "Talk to me," he said softly. "I know you cannot speak the words, but write them down. Tell me what you are feeling." She pulled out her notebook with shaking hands. "I am so afraid of losing you, of losing this. The accident that took my voice also took my father and brother. I cannot survive losing you too." He read the words, his expression pained. "Beatrice, look at me." When she did, she saw determination in his eyes. "I cannot promise that nothing bad will ever happen. This is a dangerous place sometimes, and life is uncertain. But I can promise that I will fight with everything I have to stay with you, to protect you and this life we are building. You are not going to lose me, not if I have any say in it. How can you be sure?" "Because I have something worth staying alive for now," he said simply. "Before you came, I was just going through the motions, building this ranch because it gave me purpose but no real joy. You changed that. You made this place a home, made my life mean something beyond just work and survival. I am not going to give that up, not to rustlers or outlaws or anything else." She leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. He wrapped his arms around her, and they sat in silence as the stars began to appear overhead, millions of them in the clear desert sky. Slowly, over the following weeks, her fear began to ease. The ranch settled back into routine, and as autumn deepened toward winter, she found herself enjoying the cooler weather and the changing rhythms of ranch life. The garden had to be winterized, but she had managed to preserve and store a good amount of vegetables. She spent more time indoors, sewing and reading and learning to make the crafts Mrs. Henderson taught her. She also became close friends with Sarah, who visited regularly and brought her young daughter, a precocious 3-year-old named Emma. Watching Yates interact with the little girl, patient and playful, made Beatrice's heart ache with longing. She wanted that, wanted to see him hold their own child. As if sensing her thoughts, he came to her one evening in late November and pulled her onto his lap as they sat by the fire. "I have been thinking," he said, his breath warm against her ear. "We have been married 3 months now, and you have made me happier than I ever thought possible. I was wondering how you would feel about starting a family if God blesses us that way." She turned in his arms and kissed him deeply, pouring all her agreement and desire into the gesture. When she pulled back, she was smiling. She wrote quickly, "I have been hoping you would say something. Yes, I want that very much." His answering smile was brilliant. "Good, that is very good." What followed was a time of deep contentment. The winter was mild by Eastern standards, though the Arizona nights grew cold. Beatrice and Yates grew closer with each passing day, learning the rhythms of each other's bodies and hearts. The physical intimacy of their marriage deepened into something profound, a connection that went beyond mere physical pleasure to touch something almost spiritual. By January, she began to suspect she might be pregnant. Her courses, always regular, did not come when expected. Her breasts became tender and certain smells made her nauseous. She waited another week, afraid to hope too much, before writing a note to Yates. "I think I might be with child." His reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He let out a whoop of joy, picked her up and spun her around before remembering himself and setting her down gently as if she were made of glass. "Are you certain? When did you know? How are you feeling? Do we need to get the doctor?" She laughed silently at his barrage of questions and wrote, "Not certain yet, but fairly sure. I feel good, just a bit queasy sometimes. We can see the doctor when we go to town next week." Dr. Morrison confirmed the pregnancy, estimating the baby would arrive in late summer. "You are healthy and strong," he told her through Yates, who relayed every word. "I see no reason this should not be a normal, uneventful pregnancy. Just take care of yourself, eat well, and do not overdo the physical work." Yates took this advice very seriously, perhaps too seriously. He tried to prevent her from doing any lifting, cooking, or even walking too far. She had to rein him in with a firmly worded note. "I am pregnant, not an invalid. I need to stay active and useful. I will be careful, but you must let me live my life." "I just want to keep you both safe," he protested. But he backed off, though she often caught him watching her with concern when he thought she was not looking. The news of the pregnancy spread through the community, and the women rallied around her with advice, hand-me-down baby clothes, and promises of help when her time came. Mrs. Henderson appeared with yarn and needles and taught her to knit tiny booties and blankets. Sarah shared stories of her own pregnancy and assured her that the fear and excitement were both normal. As spring arrived and Beatrice's belly began to swell noticeably, Yates became even more attentive. He talked to the baby, his hand resting on her stomach, telling stories about the ranch and the world the little one would enter. "You are going to love it here," he said one evening. "Wide open spaces to run, horses to ride when you are old enough, and a mother who will love you more than anything in the world." Beatrice placed her hand over his and wished, not for the first time, that she could tell him how much she loved him in spoken words. The written ones felt inadequate to capture the depth of her feelings, but when she looked into his eyes, she saw that he understood. He always understood. In May, as the weather warmed and her belly grew rounder, they received unexpected visitors. A fancy carriage pulled up to the ranch, looking completely out of place in the dusty yard, and a well-dressed man and woman stepped out. Beatrice was hanging laundry when they arrived, and she immediately moved toward the house, uncertain and alarmed by these unfamiliar people. Yates came from the barn, wiping his hands on his pants, his expression wary. "Can I help you folks?" he asked, positioning himself between the strangers and Beatrice. "We are looking for Mrs. Beatrice Warren," the man said in a clipped Eastern accent. "We were told we might find her here." Beatrice's heart lurched. She recognized that voice. It belonged to her uncle, her mother's brother, whom she had met only once before her mother's death. She moved forward slowly, and Yates immediately took her hand. "I am Yates Warren, Beatrice's husband. What is your business with her?" The man looked at Beatrice, his expression unreadable. "I am Douglas Taylor, Beatrice's uncle. This is my wife, Margaret. We have been searching for you, my dear. When we heard about your mother's passing, we came as quickly as we could, but you had already left Boston. Your aunt told us you had gone west to marry." Beatrice's mind reeled. She had not thought about her mother's family in months. They had been estranged for years over some long-forgotten dispute, and she had not expected them to care about her fate. "Perhaps we could speak inside," Margaret suggested, her voice gentler than her husband's. "We have traveled a long way, and there are things that must be discussed." Yates looked at Beatrice, clearly deferring to her wishes. She nodded reluctantly, and they all moved into the house. Beatrice put on coffee, grateful for something to do with her hands, while Yates sat protectively close to her. Douglas Taylor cleared his throat. "I will be direct. We have only recently learned of my sister's death and the circumstances that led to your departure from Boston. Your Aunt Prudence wrote to us, though the letter took months to reach us in Europe. We returned immediately to try to find you and make amends for our absence." Beatrice pulled out her notebook. "Why? You and Mother had not spoken in years." "That is true, and it is one of my great regrets," Douglas said, his composure cracking slightly. "We argued over her marriage to your father. I thought she was making a mistake, marrying a man with so little means and prospects. I was young and arrogant and very, very wrong. By the time I realized it, too many years had passed, and I did not know how to bridge the gap I had created." Margaret reached over and patted Beatrice's hand. "Your mother wrote to us, did you know? Every Christmas, she sent a letter telling us about you, about your accomplishments and your character. We treasured those letters, even though Douglas was too stubborn to respond properly. When we heard she had passed, and that you had been left in Prudence's care, we were horrified. That woman is bitter and cruel, and we knew you must have suffered under her roof. I survived," Beatrice wrote, "and I found happiness here. So we can see," Douglas said, looking around the modest but comfortable home. His gaze lingered on her pregnant belly. "You are married and expecting a child. I must admit, this is not what we expected to find. The advertisement made it sound quite desperate, a young woman alone and vulnerable." "She was alone and vulnerable," Yates said, his voice hard, "through no fault of her own, but she is not any more. She is my wife, and she will never be alone again." "I did not mean to offend," Douglas said quickly. "Quite the opposite. I am relieved to see that you have found security and, it appears, genuine affection, but we came to offer you another option. We are wealthy, Beatrice, far more so than when your mother and I had our falling out. We can provide you with anything you might need: education, society, comfort. We have a large home in Philadelphia, and you would be welcome to live with us as our daughter. We never had children of our own, and we would like to make up for the years we lost with you and your mother." Beatrice stared at him, trying to process this sudden turn of events. A month ago, even a week ago, the offer might have tempted her. The promise of security, of being part of a family again, of not struggling through the hard work of ranch life. But now, sitting in her home with her husband beside her and their child growing inside her, she knew exactly what her answer would be. She wrote carefully, making sure the words conveyed everything she felt. "I appreciate that you came looking for me and that you want to make amends. But my life is here now. Yates is my family, and this baby will be my family. I do not need wealth or society. I need exactly what I have." Yates squeezed her hand, his eyes bright with emotion. Douglas read her words and nodded slowly. "I understand. I hoped you might say that, actually. It shows you have your mother's strength and good judgment, but please know that our offer stands always." If you ever need anything, anything at all, you have only to write to us. You are our family, whether you live with us or not. And you would be welcome to visit, Margaret added. Or perhaps we could visit you if that would be acceptable. I would love to know my great-niece or nephew when the time comes. Beatrice smiled and nodded. I would like that very much. They stayed for dinner, and the conversation grew easier as the evening progressed. Douglas and Margaret asked about the ranch, about how Beatrice and Yates had met, about their plans for the future. Yates spoke proudly about their growing operation and his hopes to expand the herd. Beatrice showed Margaret the nursery she was slowly putting together, the cradle Yates had built with his own hands. By the time the Taylors departed to stay at the hotel in town, promising to visit again before returning east, Beatrice felt something loosen in her chest. She had not realized she was carrying grief over her lost family until she had the chance to reclaim part of it. Douglas was not her father and Margaret was not her mother, but they were connection to her past, to her mother's memory, and that meant something. How are you feeling? Yates asked as they prepared for bed. That was quite a surprise today, she wrote. Good, confused but good. I did not expect to ever have family again besides you. You have family, he said firmly, pulling her close. You have me and Charlie and Tom and everyone in town who cares about you. And soon you will have this little one. He placed his hand on her belly, and as if in response the baby kicked. His eyes widened. Was that? She nodded, grinning at his amazed expression. The baby had started moving a few weeks ago, gentle flutters that had gradually strengthened into definite kicks. Yates had felt it once before, but his wonder never diminished. Hello in there, he murmured to her stomach. I am your father and I cannot wait to meet you. Summer arrived with scorching heat, and Beatrice grew larger and more uncomfortable with each passing day. She could no longer see her feet, her back ached constantly, and sleeping was nearly impossible. But she also felt powerful and purposeful, her body performing the miraculous work of growing a new life. Dr. Morrison came out to the ranch in mid-August to check on her. Any day now, he said after his examination. The baby has dropped into position and everything looks good. When the pains start, send one of your hands for me. I will come as quickly as I can. That night, Beatrice woke to a strange tightening across her belly. She lay still, timing the sensations until they became too strong to ignore. She shook Yates awake. I think it is time. He was instantly alert, though she could see the flash of panic in his eyes before he got it under control. All right, I will get Charlie to fetch the doctor. You just breathe and do not worry about anything. Easier said than done, she thought, but nodded. Mrs. Henderson arrived first, having insisted on staying in town for the past week in anticipation of this moment. She swept in like a general taking command of a battlefield, boiling water and preparing clean linens with brisk efficiency. Sarah came next, offering encouragement and holding Beatrice's hand through the increasingly painful contractions. You are doing wonderfully, she said. Just breathe through it. It will be over before you know it, and you will have your baby. Yates hovered anxiously until Mrs. Henderson shooed him out. You men are useless during times like these. Go pace somewhere else and let us work. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the next afternoon. There were moments when Beatrice thought she could not endure another contraction, when the pain overwhelmed everything else. But then she would think of Yates waiting outside, of the baby she was about to meet, and she would find the strength to continue. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Dr. Morrison said, All right, Beatrice, one more push. Give me everything you have. She bore down with every ounce of strength remaining in her exhausted body, and suddenly there was a release, a sense of completion, and then the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. A baby's cry, strong and healthy and perfect. "It is a boy, doctor," Morrison announced, holding up the squirming, red-faced infant. A big, healthy boy. Tears streamed down Beatrice's face as they placed the baby on her chest, still covered in birth fluids but absolutely beautiful. She looked into his scrunched-up face and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. This was her son, hers and Yates's, a perfect blend of both of them. "Can I bring the father in now?" Mrs. Henderson asked, and Beatrice nodded eagerly. Yates burst through the door, his face pale and strained. But when he saw her holding their son, his expression transformed into pure joy. He dropped to his knees beside the bed, his hand tentatively touching the baby's tiny head. "He is perfect," Yates whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "You are perfect. Thank you, Beatrice. Thank you for this gift." She wished desperately that she could tell him how much she loved him, how grateful she was for the life they had built together, how this moment was everything she had ever dreamed of and more. But all she could do was reach for his hand and squeeze, hoping he could feel everything in her touch. "What should we name him?" Yates asked, looking from the baby to her and back again. She had thought about this extensively, and she pulled the note she had written earlier from under her pillow. "Matthew, it means gift from God, and that is what he is." "Matthew Warren," Yates said, testing the name. "I love it. Hello, Matthew. Welcome to the world, son." The next weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Matthew was a good baby, healthy and strong, though he had healthy lungs and was not shy about using them. Beatrice discovered that motherhood came more naturally than she had feared. She could not sing lullabies, but she hummed softly, and Matthew seemed to find comfort in the vibrations against her chest. Yates was a devoted father, taking on more of the household chores so Beatrice could rest between feedings. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with Matthew when he was fussy, and looked at his son with such adoration that it made Beatrice's heart ache. The community rallied around them, as frontier communities did. Women brought food and offered advice. Douglas and Margaret sent an extravagant package of baby clothes and toys, along with a letter expressing their joy at becoming great-uncle and great-aunt. Even Charlie and Tom became unofficial uncles, taking turns holding the baby and making ridiculous faces to earn his first smiles. As autumn arrived and Matthew grew stronger and more alert, Beatrice found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. A year ago, she had been alone and voiceless, living in her aunt's cold house and seeing no future beyond more of the same. Now she had a husband who loved her, a son who depended on her, and a home that was truly hers. One evening, as she rocked Matthew to sleep and watched Yates working on fixing a chair by lamplight, she felt a strange sensation in her throat. It was not painful exactly, just a loosening, as if something that had been clenched tight for years was finally relaxing. She opened her mouth, not really expecting anything, but feeling compelled to try. "Yates," she whispered, and the sound, rough and quiet but unmistakably a word, hung in the air between them. He dropped the tool he was holding, his head snapping up to stare at her. "Did you just—" "Yes," she said, the word coming easier this time. Tears flooded her eyes. "Yes, I spoke." He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her and Matthew into a careful embrace. "Say it again," he demanded, his own voice thick with emotion. "Say anything." "I love you," she said, the words rusty but clear. "I love you so much, Yates Warren." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, mindful of the baby between them but unable to contain his joy. "I love you too. God, Beatrice, I love you too." "My voice came back," she said wonderingly, testing the words, feeling the vibration in her throat. I do not understand how or why, but it is back. Maybe it just needed time, he said, cupping her face in his hands. Maybe it needed you to feel safe enough, loved enough. Or maybe it was always going to come back when you were ready. She thought about that, about the 3 years of silence and the slow healing that had happened since she arrived in Arizona. Maybe he was right. Maybe she had needed to learn that her worth was not dependent on her voice, that she could be loved and valued exactly as she was, before she could reclaim what had been taken. You want to try talking to Matthew? Yates asked, gesturing to their son, who was watching them with wide, curious eyes. Beatrice looked down at the baby in her arms, her heart overflowing. "Hello, my sweet boy," she whispered, and Matthew made a gurgling sound in response. "Mama loves you so very much." The word felt strange and wonderful in her mouth. Mama. She was a mother, a wife, a woman with a voice and a future. The broken girl who had arrived on that dusty platform over a year ago seemed like a different person, someone from another life. Over the following days and weeks, her voice grew stronger. It was still hoarse sometimes, and she found herself falling into silence out of habit, but the words were there when she needed them. She sang to Matthew, soft lullabies her mother had sung to her. She told Yates about her childhood, stories she had only written about before. She thanked Mrs. Henderson out loud for all her kindness and laughed with Sarah over coffee. But she also learned that having her voice back did not change who she had become during the silent years. She was still comfortable with quiet, still preferred actions to empty words. And Yates, who had fallen in love with her in silence, loved her just as much now that she could speak. "You know what I realized?" he said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset while Matthew slept peacefully in his cradle. "I told you that first day that your voice was safe with me, however it came, whenever it came, and I meant it. But I think maybe what I really meant was that you were safe with me, all of you, voice or no voice. That is what matters. You saved me," she said softly, leaning against his shoulder. "When I came here, I was so lost and broken. You gave me a home and a purpose and love. You saved me, Yates." "No," he said, turning to look at her with those warm blue eyes. "We saved each other. I was just going through the motions before you came, building something without really knowing why. You gave me a reason, Beatrice. You made me whole." As the months turned into years, their life together deepened and grew. The ranch prospered, expanding as Yates had always dreamed. Matthew grew into a bright, energetic toddler who loved following his father around and helping with chores in the way that only small children can help, which is to say not very much but with enormous enthusiasm. When Matthew was 2, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant again. This time, they welcomed a daughter, whom they named Sarah Grace after the friend who had been such a support to Beatrice. The little girl had her mother's gray eyes and her father's dark hair, and she was doted on by her older brother, who took his role as protector very seriously. Douglas and Margaret visited regularly, usually staying for several weeks at a time. They proved to be doting great aunt and uncle, spoiling the children and providing a connection to Beatrice's past that she treasured. They also funded some improvements to the ranch, insisting on helping their family even though Yates was doing well enough on his own. Charlie eventually married a schoolteacher who came to Tombstone, and Tom found love with a widow who owned a boarding house in town. Both couples remained close to Beatrice and Yates, their children growing up together in the way of frontier families who depend on each other. Mrs. Henderson remained a fixture in their lives, bossy and opinionated and deeply loved by everyone who knew her. She taught Beatrice to quilt, and they spent countless hours working on projects together while the children played at their feet. When Matthew was 5 and Sarah was 3, Beatrice gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named James and Julia. The house became chaotic and noisy, and full of the kind of happy chaos Yates had once dreamed of. He thrived in it, patient and playful with his children, teaching them about the ranch and the land, instilling in them the values of hard work and integrity. Beatrice discovered that she loved being a mother, loved the endless questions and the sticky kisses, and the way her children looked at her with complete trust. She sang to them, told them stories, and taught them to read and write. She also taught them that silence had its own power, that not every moment needed to be filled with noise. As the children grew older, Matthew showed an interest in ranching like his father, following Yates around and absorbing everything he could learn. Sarah proved to be musical, teaching herself to play the old piano they had acquired and filling the house with melodies. James was quiet and thoughtful, preferring books to outdoor work, and Julia was adventurous and fearless, keeping everyone on their toes. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates took Beatrice back to Tombstone, to the church where they had been married. Reverend Thomas, older but still serving the community, smiled when he saw them. "I remember your wedding," he said. "I remember thinking what a leap of faith you both were taking, binding yourselves to someone you barely knew. But I also remember the way you looked at each other, like you already understood something important. I am glad to see I was right to perform that ceremony." "So am I," Yates said, his arm around Beatrice's waist. "Best decision I ever made." They stood in the quiet church, remembering that day a decade ago when they had promised themselves to each other with no real knowledge of what the future held. They had been so young, so uncertain, but also so hopeful. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Beatrice asked, her voice clear and strong now, though she still treasured silence at times. "You said my voice was safe with you." "I remember," he said, pulling her closer. "I meant it then and I mean it now. Everything about you is safe with me, Beatrice, always." "I know," she said, rising on her toes to kiss him. "I have always known from the very first moment. That is why I stayed. That is why I will always stay." Outside the church, they could hear the sounds of Tombstone, a town that had grown and changed with them. The silver boom was slowing, and some people were moving on, but others had put down roots and were building lasting lives. The Warren family was part of that now, woven into the fabric of the community. They walked back to the ranch, taking the long way so they could enjoy the Arizona landscape they both loved. The mountains rose in the distance, purple and majestic, and the sky was that particular shade of blue that seemed to exist only in this corner of the world. "You ever regret it?" Yates asked suddenly. "Answering that advertisement, coming here to marry a stranger?" "Never," she said without hesitation. "This is where I was always meant to be with you. I did not know it when I stepped off that stagecoach, but I know it now with absolute certainty. You are my home, Yates, not the ranch, not the house, not even this beautiful territory. You. And you are mine," he said, stopping to face her fully. "I thought I was just getting a wife, someone to share the work and maybe provide companionship. I got so much more than that. I got a partner, a friend, the love of my life and the mother of my children. I got everything I never knew I needed." They stood there in the middle of the dusty road, holding each other as the sun moved across the sky, and Beatrice felt a profound sense of peace. The girl who had lost her voice in tragedy had found it again in love. The young woman who had arrived in silence had learned to speak her heart, and the mail-order bride who had been so afraid had discovered courage she never knew she possessed. Years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows as all lives do. Yates's hair gained threads of silver, and lines appeared at the corners of Beatrice's eyes. The children grew into young adults, each finding their own path, while remaining rooted in the values their parents had taught them. Matthew took over more and more of the ranch operations, proving to be as skilled and dedicated as his father. He married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread, and they built their own house on Warren land, keeping the family operation going. Sarah's musical talent earned her a scholarship to a music school in San Francisco, and though it was hard to let her go, Beatrice and Yates supported her dreams. She would return for visits, filling the house with music and stories of her adventures. James became a lawyer, settling in Tucson and working for justice for those who could not afford representation. Beatrice saw echoes of her own journey in his passion for helping the voiceless find their power. Julia, true to her adventurous nature, became a photographer, traveling throughout the West and documenting the changing landscape and the people who inhabited it. Her work would eventually be displayed in galleries back east, bringing her a measure of fame that she handled with the same fearlessness she brought to everything. Through it all, Beatrice and Yates remained each other's constant. They had built something lasting, not just in the ranch and the family, but in the love that had grown from uncertain beginnings into something unshakable. On a warm evening in late summer, exactly 25 years after Beatrice had first arrived in Tombstone, they sat on their porch as they had so many times before. The house was quiet, with all the children grown and living their own lives, though they remained close and visited often. 25 years, Yates said, shaking his head in wonder. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together. I know what you mean, Beatrice said, taking his hand. Her voice was as clear as ever, though she still valued silence and often chose it. Do you remember how nervous I was, arriving here to meet a stranger I was supposed to marry? I remember, he said with a smile. And do you remember how worried I was that you would take one look at me and my small ranch and decide to get back on that stagecoach? That never crossed my mind, she said honestly. The moment you said my voice was safe with you, I knew I had made the right choice. You saw me, really saw me, right from the beginning, not as broken or damaged, but as a whole person who just happened to communicate differently. Because that is what you were, he said, bringing her hand to his lips. What you are, the bravest, strongest, most remarkable woman I have ever known. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Cattle lowed in the distance, a familiar and comforting sound. The ranch had grown over the years, and they employed several hands now, but the heart of it remained what it had always been, a home built on love and mutual respect. I have been thinking, Yates said after a while. Maybe it is time to write down our story, for the children and grandchildren, so they know how it all began, how a cowboy and a woman who could not speak found each other and built this life. That is a lovely idea, Beatrice said. Though I think the most important part is not that I could not speak. It is that you taught me I did not need to prove my worth with words, that I was enough, exactly as I was. And you taught me that silence could be powerful, that real communication goes far beyond just talking. You made me a better man, Beatrice. You made me want to be better. As darkness fell and the first stars began to appear, they went inside to the home they had built together. The walls held decades of memories. Children's laughter, quiet conversations, moments of crisis overcome together, and countless ordinary days that had woven themselves into something extraordinary. Beatrice moved to the desk in the corner of the room, the same desk where she had written so many notes in those early days when her voice had been locked away. She pulled out fresh paper and a pen, ready to begin documenting their story. But before she could write the first word, Yates came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. I love you, he said simply. I have loved you from the moment you handed me that letter explaining your silence and trusted me with your vulnerability. And I will love you until my last breath and beyond." She turned in his arms and kissed him deeply, putting all her love and gratitude into the gesture. Then, pulling back just enough to speak, she said the words that still felt miraculous even after years of having her voice back. "I love you too. Today, tomorrow, and always." And as they held each other in the home they had built, surrounded by evidence of the life they had created, Beatrice knew that her journey from silence to voice had been about so much more than just being able to speak. It had been about finding someone who heard her even in the quiet, who valued her presence above her words, who loved her completely and unconditionally. She had arrived as his mail-order bride in silence, uncertain and afraid. But Yates had been true to his word from that very first day. Her voice had been safe with him, and so had her heart. And in protecting both, he had given her the greatest gift she could have imagined. A love that transcended words, a partnership built on mutual respect, and a life filled with meaning and joy. Their story had begun with a leap of faith across a country, a marriage to a stranger, and words written instead of spoken. But it had become something beautiful and lasting, a testament to the truth that love speaks its own language, one that both silence and speech can express equally well. And as the Arizona stars shone overhead and the desert wind whispered through the darkness, two people who had found each other against all odds held tight to the precious, miraculous life they had built together, knowing that theirs was a love story for the ages.